Hi, welcome to How to RPG. My name is Fred Wheeler and today I want to talk about the ultimate guide to dungeon environments, but not just dungeon environments, but different types of dungeon environments. Because I think a lot of people assume that a dungeon is just one sort of thing. It's a big maze, right? That's it. There's nothing else to it. Why else do we need to even talk about this topic? We should just stop right now. But that's not true. In fact, there's a lot going on with a different type of dungeon environment, and we're going to go over that today. So, dungeon environments. One of the factors, I'm going to give you a couple of things, but one of the factors to consider is you need to make dungeon environments three-dimensional. It needs to be a three-dimensional location just like the real world. And this forces your player characters to crawl, climb, jump through the areas, not just walk and run. We want them to use everything at their disposal. Even swimming would be useful. Anything that gets them to do something other than just walking and running. And also, when it comes to a dungeon, there needs to be a narrative theme to your dungeon. It makes the experience of exploring your dungeon more interesting to the player characters. Players need to be able to interact with the dungeon environment. It's all very well having things they can find and take with them and put in their pack, but you want them to be able to move doors, move a wall, move a statue, objects, furniture, even shift and move the rooms potentially. Present multiple entries and exits. Why would we do this? If we have multiple entries and exits in our dungeon, it's the first opportunity that our game master is presenting to the players in terms of choice. Now we have a choice about which entry point we can use, which exit point we use, and it also allows for multiple ways of escaping when we have to escape, because that might well happen. Presenting a few different routes throughout your dungeon. Now, often this is talked about as loops, but it doesn't have to be a loop. But a few different routes through the dungeon means you don't just have a roller coaster ride. What you have is an opportunity to explore a region and make choices about where you go first. You might go to every location, but the order that you do it is important, so different routes is very important. And also, if we have different routes, if we get stuck, we can try a different pathway. Secret areas and pathways in a dungeon. This allows a player character to gain bonus information, potentially, bonus items, possibly magic items, and also avoid dangerous regions or routes that we don't really want to take. So there's a good route to take, and then there's a bad route to take. Also, when people think about dungeons, again, they tend to think maze, but a dungeon is simply a location with very distinct boundaries. That's it. So the types of dungeons are very broad, and they're not necessarily just an arbitrary maze. So here it's a pretty big list of different things you could use as a dungeon, and I want you to take the ones you like and leave the ones you have no use for. Now, obviously, you could have a hedge maze in a palace garden. It's quite a common thing to include into an adventure, particularly if you have a big mansion. You could have a riverboat with multiple levels that's traveling along some sort of waterway. That's a dungeon. You could have a wizard, priest, or a king or a queen in some sort of tomb. Tombs are always good dungeons. You can have a bandit's secret hole in the wall. It might be a hideout at some sort of lair. It's going to be possibly a cavern system. Maybe it's been roughed out. Maybe it has been built over time. Who knows? You can have an old theatre that used to house plays and concerts and performances. That can be your dungeon. What about an abandoned casino that offered a range of different gambling activities that aren't run now, but potentially you have the opportunity to do something with this, even though it is not currently operating and it has been abandoned. What about a giant clock with some moving clockwork chambers and passageways that's constantly shifting and changing position? An incredibly narrow honeycombed limestone gorge could be a dungeon. Now, a gorge is just a very narrow valley, really. Strange planes. You could have planes of existence connected by a series of portals that makes up your dungeon. The belly of a colossal ship-swallowing sea creature that has consumed or eaten your sailing ship. Now you have to explore the innards of this creature. A perilous bog or a quicksand-filled mire or swamp can be listed as a dungeon. You could have the slave master's quarters and the slave pens of some place that you have to find and then hopefully rescue the people there. But you've got slave pens to explore and all the various rooms attached to that. What about rapids or river channels that sweep through a valley in an unusually formed sort of series of pathways crossing over each other? So it means you can go, obviously usually it's going with the rapids is going to be easier, but you can take a different pathway, you can climb out of it, you can move further along the bank, things like that. A giant tree that's been riddled with many crevices and hollows, like an enormous, colossal fey or elf tree. A massive melting iceberg that's full of holes, as certain parts of it will melt faster than others, forming not just pathways but room cavities. A monster-infested palace that's made of glass or mirrors. A flowing, flooded underground prison that has multiple levels, and then you need to swim down various levels and find your way through this place. An iron obelisk of great size filled with passageways and rooms, and maybe it's full of stars. An evil giant ruined fortress, a fortress that is controlled by a giant who has been throwing their weight around and is tyrannical in some way. A partially submerged clock tower that used to be part of a city but now is really sinking below the surface. A floating castle that appears only at night. A massive candle that is partially hollow at certain places and is slowly melting from the flame on the top of it. A graveyard of giant skeletons where you can actually explore the innards of various cavities within their skulls and their bones. A glacier of poisoned water, where you can see the water and the ice has carved out the rock within a mountainside. You could have a massive skull of an ancient dragon or a god as your dungeon. A sunken sailing ship wedged in the coral reef is a dungeon. A tangled forest of thorny trees and briars. A giant insect-infested temple. You could have a volcano, and the lava tubes and the crater all connect to steam vents, giving you a very deadly and dangerous environment to explore, but it's still got areas that you can move through. A sewer system under a city populated by giant rats and possibly were-rats. An intricate giant hourglass with glass tubes that's slowly filling with sand. So there's going to be a limited time frame that you can actually explore this hourglass. What about a storm that has become solid cloud and actually formed pathways and areas within it? A crashed spaceship that has been found in the wilderness. A colossal walking iron or stone humanoid that pounds the ground and moves around the world, causing destruction. But our adventurers are going to explore the innards of this thing. And then the exotic biodome of a garden put out by a druid or a mad scientist. There's a lot of different things. All of these are actually dungeons. So when you think dungeon and you think, well, I don't like dungeons because I like to have something that's a bit different, I can assure you that dungeons can be different. It's really about understanding what a dungeon is. It's got a boundary and it has a number of elements that allow you to do certain things and make choices and take a different path rather than just one or two. And that's it. It's really not much else to it. So I'm hoping that this was useful to you, and if it was, fantastic. I want to thank my patrons who support me every week so I can run this program. And I want to thank you for watching. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.